So as I said, my name is Maria. I'm currently working with the Institute in the Environment. I'm a graduate student here at Duluth. And this semester we're putting together these panels related to the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, also known as SDGs. And tonight panel is connected to goal number 8, number 9, and number 17. And it's just really important that we keep this conversation going and take action about all these sustainable development goals. This project is funded by IonE Twin Cities and the Rapid Response Grant through the GPS Alliance. And we've put together this panel this semester working with the faculty so that we can keep, as I said, these conversations going and give students resources about the different classes that are happening at UMD and how we connect those to the sustainable development goals and introduce them in our curriculum. So thank you, Dr. Nancy, for trusting us and putting this panel together and for allowing us to be here in your class. I'm super excited about the group of people that we have. They all have a lot of experience in different areas, and I'm really excited for them to share their work with you all. And just asking the audience members to please stay muted during the conversation. And as I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. And our moderator will ask them to our panelists as she sees fit. So, and again, this panel is going to be recorded and then posted in the IonE Duluth webpage for future academic use. And now, Dr. Nancy, hand it off to you.
Okay. So an official welcome to all of our panelists and our guests today as well. And so I'll ask you first, the three of you, to each introduce yourself briefly. If you could tell us who you are, of course pronouns, because we talk about that every day when we meet, or put them on screen, one or the other. And then if you could also tell us kind of what you do, what your role is, what kind of, and maybe other than email, perhaps, what kind of communication do you do the most in terms of what genre format, or what way do you communicate with your colleagues more than anything else? Usually it's always email, but besides that, what is the most thing? And let that be your fun fact as we are getting started here.
I guess I can start. Thank you, Dr. Nancy, and everyone for having me, and Maria for inviting me. My name is Mike Kenyanya. I'm an alum of UMD, graduated in 2019 from LSBE with a degree in Management Information Systems. I work at Accenture, a consulting firm, and mostly supporting different IT projects and whatnot, but I also serve on the Board of Regents for the university. I was involved with student government all my 4 years at UMD, and really enjoyed being able to serve, and I had the opportunity to continue doing so after graduation. So my knowledge on sustainability is limited, but Maria thought I could offer some insight here and on the communications part. So I'm excited for this conversation. And yeah. What method of communication do I use the most? You said with colleagues, we use Microsoft Teams at work, and obviously lots of Zoom for the university. Personally, I'm on Twitter a lot. Twitter's funny to me, so I spend a lot of time on there. Yeah.
I'm a Twitter girl, so yeah, we'll have to do some following after this.
Hi, I'm Shannon Laing, and I am the Main Street Lincoln Park Program Director at Equilibrium 3 here in Duluth. And she, her are my pronouns. And I'm the non-bulldog. I attended Wartburg College in Waverly, Iowa, many years ago. So we'll just leave it at that. And my form of communication, I work and live in a neighborhood, or I work in a neighborhood that has a digital divide. It has a big age difference, a lot of folks with disabilities. So every time I'm approaching communication, I have to be looking at the audience. And so it is widely varied, and I'm a firm believer in the right tool for the job. And you'll hear me say that a lot today on a personal level and on our teams. Like Mike, a lot of Zoom, a lot of Zoom. And because my neighborhood work involves a lot of events, I'm on Facebook a lot because everybody makes a Facebook event. So I'm using that a lot as a platform throughout. And within our team, we also use Google Teams. So.
Okay, I guess that leaves me. I'm Madeline Sinclair, and I am a Bulldog alum as well. I graduated in 2018 and was a finance and German studies major. I was lucky enough to do a lot of work in sustainability at UMD. I worked a lot on solar projects through groups like the Sun Delegation, and was able to serve on Student Service Fee Committee as well as other student groups revolving around sustainability. I'm currently a pricing analyst for IBM, which is basically a specific kind of financial analyst. And we use a lot of Slack and a lot of WebEx, which is essentially Zoom. So we have teams who are in all kinds of different time zones and often all over the world. So it's nice to kind of have that face-to-face connection.
Okay. So a couple of specific questions that I thought might be really useful for our students at this point as they're getting ready to start these kind of big research-based projects. And excuse me, sorry. One of those is in terms of providing background information or summarizing background information about a topic when you're writing for or when you're addressing an audience or a set of readers where their knowledge level about the topic might vary quite a bit. How do you kind of bridge that so that you're not boring people to death who already know a lot of the information versus making sure that you don't have gaps where you're not leaving folks and not able to keep up with the rest of what you were doing? Maybe some strategies for how you address those kinds of gaps and providing information, background before you can launch into something new.
Yeah, I'll start it, then pass it around. I would say you always air for those who don't understand it, right? Because the experts might be bored, but they can skip over that sentence or whatever. I mean, but they'll still understand it at the end, right? But what you don't want is people to read it or hear your speech or whatever, and at the end, and I don't know what that was about, So if you're gonna air, I would air on over explaining, and then you can also point to resources, right? Quick summary about something, which you can read more about, whether if it's online, a link or as well described by insert authors here, or a book or something, right? So you can I would err on the side for the people who don't know as much, but I feel like you can point those that need to know more to those resources, and they can kind of pause and take a look at that if they feel that's necessary.
To build a little bit on what Mike said, I think it's really important to level set, right? To really make sure that all of those people are being brought up to the same level and everyone's really starting from the same place. And I think that visuals are really effective with this. You can do a lot with PowerPoints and with printed information. And so I think that that's a useful tool to kind of put into play.
I'm in agreement with Mike to make sure that you're addressing the folks who are maybe not as caught up and meeting people where they're at. Offering some materials pre-presentation if that's an option, not always an option, but sometimes an option. If it's an in-person scenario, having a bullet point paper copy that somebody can grab as they're coming in the door if they choose to have that sort of as a reference point as you're talking. And then a follow-up with links, as Mike said, is also effective for that follow-up piece.
Shannon, as you were speaking, I just thought of footnotes as well. I see that in a lot of documents where the word is defined. There's the number and I go down and there's the definition of the word. The person who knows the definition will skip over it. Someone like me who doesn't, will go down and read that word.
And if I'm not sure about the group, I don't want to make assumptions, I'll just ask right up front. How many of you are familiar with X? And get a show of hands so that I have at least a general understanding of where I'm starting the conversation. And that can clue me in whether I need to give a little bit more lengthy introduction or keep it short based on the number of hands that I see go up.
Great, thank you so much for that. Our students are often at this stage, they're preparing materials for general business audiences, so they know that in some cases there'll be folks that are very early career professionals, and other times there'll be folks that are much further along, and so trying to calibrate that can be kind of difficult. Excuse me. So I guess one of the big questions that I have, and this is community and planet related, is that kind of question. I apologize. Excuse me. So in terms of balancing the needs of a community for things like economic justice, for example, and the needs of the planet in terms of things like sustainability, how do you balance or how do you connect that or align that, or how would you suggest figuring out ways that we can align that with kind of the needs and interests of business as well? So we, in my course in particular, I kind of take the broad approach of saying that business is really about solving problems as well as earning a profit or creating jobs, right? That these things are all connected, right? That the business is not just about extracting profits, but this kind of broader view of what the philosophy of business is. And so I'm interested in having you all expand a little bit as you can on how you figure out what that balance is. How do you go about finding the places where those things do align and where those intersections are that we could maybe start from or move on from in ways that benefit everyone?
I can start us off. So as someone who has a business background and kind of has more corporate experience, but has a personal passion for something like sustainability, ultimately in an ideal world, those things are all integrated together. We talk about the 3 Ps of sustainability and just generally of good business practices: people, planet, and profit. And your 3-legged stool shouldn't stand without any one of those. But it doesn't always work that way. And I think that one of the keys to getting to that point is early integration. We should have all of those peoples and all of those parties at the table right at the beginning. As we're working on projects and as we're talking through different initiatives, whatever it might be. I think often we see that involvement come at a time when it is too late and a lot of the major decisions have been made, 75 to 90% completion of a project. Then they bring in, those other stakeholders. And so I think it's important to kind of start from the beginning and build that relationship from the ground up and really integrate it into the core mission.
Yeah, those are great points. I mean, I would agree and just say that I think the perception that profit and sustainability are like work against each other isn't necessarily true. And I think that's where a lot of people start the assumption from. But, like sustainable efforts can be profitable. If we're just talking about the maybe the obvious stuff, solar and wind energy, and people have to do those jobs, right? People have to build those materials. all those things. I think it's just that our current business structures, organizations are so set in their ways and can't fathom. They're maybe not willing to change their model because a bit of change is required, right? I mean, to fundamentally change that. But Tesla, and I don't know too much about it, but they make electric vehicles. I think Elon's doing pretty well for himself right now, right? I think he just surpassed Jeff as the richest person in the world or something like that. So those aren't polar opposites, but for a company or an organization that isn't focused on that, that stuff can be threatening, right? If your model is based on this and we're trying to push this, but to Madeline's point, if you're willing to, from an earlier stage, start thinking about how you can transition into over there. So just the assumption that those two things are polar opposites just aren't true. People are going to make money off of sustainability.
Most of the people in this group probably don't remember McDonald's having styrofoam containers for their burgers. I do, and that was a big step for them. And the way they were convinced to take that step was showing the economic benefit of switching the packaging. It actually costs less to use the paper. And so putting yourself in the shoes of your audience members and then trying to find the win-win-win is a great place to start. Obviously, things need to be, will be tweaked. There will be things that you don't know, and you'll find out in those conversations. But Madeline made a very, very good point. I'm sorry, it's Madeline, correct? Sorry about that. Madeline made a very good point about bringing all of the stakeholders together early. If you start with the business owners, they may band together and already have an us versus them mentality walking in as you bring in other stakeholders, and vice versa. If you have everybody together from the get-go, those conversations, disagreements, those things can happen and be solved organically, both at the table and in the Zoom meeting and in the side conversations that happen later on and when they run into each other at the restaurant or wherever. And of course, in my scenario, we have a pretty tight-knit community. And if you've seen what's been happening in Lincoln Park, collaboration is our secret sauce, without question. And so I've seen it unfold in a million different ways and can't stress enough how important it is to have people see that it isn't pie. If I have a piece, that doesn't mean less for you. It's a pie that grows exponentially the more people who are involved in making that pie.
I just want to sneak one more thing in there, and I hate to belabor the point, so I'm sorry. But often we do, I could go on about this forever, but often we do really see those sustainable practices and sustainable initiatives be beneficial for the bottom line of companies. Walmart is, looking at putting in skylights in some of their stores, and it's not because they're thinking about sustainability. Well, probably somewhere down the road they are, but we're seeing that as a byproduct, right? They're spending less money on electricity and it is just less overhead for them. That's first and foremost. It is helping their bottom line, but essentially it's helping sustainability as well. So there's definitely the benefit of that green bottom line as well. I can be done with that now. Thanks.
Well, speaking of Walmart, that reminds me. I remember hearing in the news when they switched to the low energy light bulbs. They made the financial news because of how many millions of dollars they saved the first year by making the switch, just by changing from the old school light bulbs to the more energy efficient ones. And so they more than paid for the cost of what were then much more expensive bulbs. These days, the price differential, of course, is not that great, but at the time they were significantly more expensive, and they still more than made their money back on energy savings during that first year. Yeah.
I'd like to point out a story that I saw this past week about Flint Hills oil refinery in Pine Bend, just south of the Twin Cities, putting in a field of solar panels. Now, if that isn't just right there, a big irony piece to help offset their energy costs to make oil and refine oil. So if there's anyone out there that has any question in their mind about what the future of our energy picture looks like, that story to me says everything.
Wow, yeah, that's pretty amazing. That does say a lot. So another question I have is this idea about thinking about how do you, as a leader in an organization, how do you communicate your values to your internal stakeholders? And on behalf of your organization, how do you communicate your organization's values to external stakeholders? The actual modalities and mechanics of that, but also the approach that you take to doing that.
I guess I can only say that as far as communication goes, I do think that action is a communication. And I think that it comes first and foremost from the top down. It really disseminates and it comes via actions. People are seeing what you're doing. And so often we see these companies where it's so easy to plaster your value and your values and your value statements on your website and do nothing about it. And so when people see you making that conscious effort and making a concentrated choice to display that, then that is really shown to both your internal and external stakeholders. I think it also helps when you are hiring employees who share in your values and you let them be ambassadors for that value into the larger society.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree, and I would say that it's, you know, just plastering or just quoting and saying these are our values used to work, and it doesn't really anymore, because of my favorite communication thing, Twitter, you know, and Instagram and whatnot. Because someone just has to catch one of your millions of employees, or someone has a bad experience on your airline, and they tweet it out, and it goes viral. So you know, companies can't get away, and organizations can't get away with just saying anymore, because people are able to go online and find out where these organizations' money is, right? Like where the billionaires are investing, and like, oh, you're investing in this cause, but you're saying this, right? I mean, like, I don't know that we had that ability before. There's just more information, right? And there's more accountability. That's why I really like that last point about prioritizing values in hiring, because sometimes I do see a story or an event about something that happened with a company, and it was one employee, and I'm like, what? Now we have to boycott the whole company? Like, this was just one person in one store in one city. What does that have to do with, you know, the rest of them and all the other innocent employees and whatnot? So and that's why the organization has to be careful who they're letting in to be an ambassador for the company, because everything's visible these days.
Absolutely. We're a nonprofit, so it's people pretty much know who we are right up front, right with our name, Equilibrium 3 says right in our name what we're about. And our CEO drives a her Nissan. And of course, right at this minute, the name is going out of my head, EV vehicle to work every day. And so that's pretty visible. We've got AmeriCorps who ride their bikes every day to work, and the advocacy work that we do around our corridor. That's actually something I'm working on right now in terms of what's going to be happening during the very large TPI project that is surrounding our neighborhood. There's going to be a lot of complete streets testing that's going to be happening through our business corridor, and facilitating those conversations with the business community who was there were a few that were very vocal and very reluctant to embrace the idea of a protected bikeway through the business corridor, as we've seen many, many times in Duluth. And now everybody's on board because we were able to be really upfront about who we are, what we're about, what we're going to advocate for within our own district where we have an office, and explain and take the time to explain why to our business partners within the corridor as well. And also second, third, fourth motion carry on hiring for value. Anybody who is going to be working for us, both either as an AmeriCorps Vista or as regular staff, they know who we are right up front and what the expectations are.
I was just thinking of the question again and reading it because they were sent. And I think we talked a bit about external stakeholders, and I just wanted to make a comment on internal. I think organizations prioritize external a bit more, right? And there may be a disconnect. Your customers might love the brand, or your students, your patients, depending what the organization is. But like, would your employees say the same thing, right? And it just brings me what I remember. My junior and senior year, I had the pleasure of being serving as the president of the student government at UMD, and both years, one of our big initiatives was mental health. Where I was talking about it, we're always on committees about it. But in one of those years, like half my team resigned, and it took us a while to be like, wow, we're not really, how much are we considering like our own mental health here? And like, how considered are we that we're all students and people have class and life and whatnot? That was an external value and there was a bit of disconnect with the internal part of that. And I think you'll find companies where the customers might love it, but the employees are like, this place is awful, so yeah.
So I want to remind my students that you can put questions in the chat. If you don't want to put them in the public chat, you can DM them to me and I'll ask them, but you don't have to have everyone else know that you were the person that asked the question. But there might be, if there are good questions in the chat, there might be a point available somewhere along the way. So it is worth thinking about what your communication questions might be for this particular audience, or about sustainability. If you're a group that you think that's one of the things that your project team might be thinking about writing about, you may be able to ask questions there as well. One of the other questions that we had on the list is about what efforts do you think are needed, and what efforts do you see organizations use when you're trying to build and establish and sustain diverse teams within your organization and even within your leadership teams?
I'd really like to speak to this because it's a struggle that we're having right now. It's happening right now. That we have struggled with, like many, about how we can best connect all of our disparate communities. Within Lincoln Park, you have a commercial corridor that's really starting to explode, and the immediate neighborhood, which is really struggling. And there's a very deep desire by the commercial entities, the businesses, to better connect with their neighbors but because of 1,000,005 reasons, racism, mistrust, all of the historical things, it's been very, very difficult to find ways to connect. So we are in the process of trying to come up with good engagement, good ways to engage our immediate residential neighbors about the discussion around the area that's directly under Highway 53, because as Highway 53 gets rebuilt, there's an opportunity to reimagine that space. And how can we really understand what people want to see under that space, and how can we help make that happen? So we just sat down this week and did quite a bit of conversation about the best way and ways to engage, and it really is multi-pronged. It has to be everything from just a basic survey that is both available paper and online, running in the background all the time. We're going to be at the busiest bus stop in Duluth at 21st and 3rd, talking to people in the mornings and the evenings when they get off the bus, at the skate park. These are people who use this area all the time. Having a barbecue, because who doesn't love that once everybody's got their shots in their arms. And also, we've got an art project up our sleeve that would be community based as well. So really kind of approaching it from as many different avenues as we possibly can is going to get us our best engagement. And then culminating and getting everybody in the same space and building leaders within each community so that I'm not speaking for somebody else. So they can be speaking for themselves and feel like they're in a safe space and have the confidence to do so. So that's where we're at, but we've been struggling with it, and my ears are wide open for all kinds of other ideas.
Okay. I think I'm rereading the question just to, and why do you think that has an effect? So I think I'll comment on the second part of the question, the effect that that's going to have on an organization and economic growth and whatnot. And it kind of goes back to what Madeline said earlier with sustainability, and that it's not just like some of the actions that Walmart and other examples we talked about aren't just for sustainability. They actually do result in helping the company's bottom line. And I think diversity is the same. And one example I can think of is I think when you don't have a diverse group of people working on a product, a service, whatever, it's just not going to be better off because you didn't have those inputs, you didn't have whatnot. And the the one thing that comes to mind for me, and ironically we're talking about sustainability, is the electric hand dryers. I absolutely hate them. And they don't work well for Black people. And this is going to sound silly, and you may know this, you may not, but they just don't, right? And I really, really don't think someone sat there and said, we're going to design it this way, right? They just probably didn't test it on the right people. They didn't test it on varying skin tones, right? They didn't have the right people on the team and whatnot, right? So if I'm in charge of a facility, I promise you I'm not putting electric hand dryers in them because that's my bias towards them, and that's the awful experience I've had with them. And that's affecting the company, right? Not because of anything intentional, but because their quality assurance testing team probably wasn't diverse and didn't test that. And you can go on YouTube and see the videos, like you got to turn angles and to get it to activate sometimes. So that's just an example that I can think of. And then another one, which is more personal to me, kind of firsthand, back to student government. We had this initiative to to revamp, get new machines in the restrooms for menstrual products, and to the old machines also required coins. We also wanted the product to be free. And Maria, you know Muiz. Muiz kind of helps spearhead that project. But long story short, it wasn't till a couple meetings in that we realized we were all just guys trying to do this project and trying to determine which brand of products, and I was like, Louise, do you know? He's like, I don't know, my guy, So I mean, there's just no way we were gonna like choose anything good or anything of quality if we didn't have the right people in the room, right? And so that's just another example of why you need the right people involved and a diverse set of people.
So I think really similarly to our conversation about values, making a conscious effort to make your teams more diverse, and especially your leadership teams, it has to be taken and it has to be really integrated into the core of your company. I think that the first big step is to recognize that maybe you could use, maybe some increased diversity and to kind of look internally. So I think that really has to be the first step. And then just to kind of echo economic benefits, conscious consumerism is on the rise, and it is definitely very prevalent. Whether, whatever aspect we're talking about, sustainability, diversity, customers care. And so when companies are making those choices and are making the conscious effort to look internally and make those improvements, that's when we're seeing customers really flock to them and really hold that loyalty.
I like the ways that you all spoke to kind of different forms of diversity. Excuse me. And I think that, sorry, one of the things that is always important, I think, and I had a mentor say this kind of thing to me once, that it's not just about who's in the room and who's not, or who is at the table, who's not, who has a seat at the table, who gets to speak at the table. That all of these elements are really relevant, and that thinking about diversity in that kind of broader way, who's being included and when are they being included, and who is being excluded and why are they being excluded. And sometimes it's like the example that Mike gave. It's not intentional, right? It's not necessarily planned that way, but understanding that that it is something you have to think about to make sure you don't end up in those kind of unintentional situations. And we are close to being out of class time because our class ends at 6:15. So I don't have any questions from students at all. So I'm afraid that if I ask another one, it might take more than 3 minutes. And I don't want to take extra time for folks. But I want to say thank you so much for coming in and talking to our students and sharing your experience and your expertise, and the rare chance that we have to have like experts, from the nonprofit world and from industry come in and talk to us about their work and make connections to the kinds of things that we'll be studying and writing about as part of these research projects that we have coming up. But also to really talk about the way you communicate and how that impacts all these other things, including the kinds of values that you're trying to express. And I just wanted to say, much appreciate you coming in. And Maria, of course, thank you so much for organizing this as well. It wouldn't have happened if it weren't for you. So I appreciate that very much.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having
me.
Sorry?
Thanks for having me.
Oh, sure.
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here, and also thank you Dr. Nancy for trusting us, and also thank you to my team, also John and Ashlyn who are also here, who also helped put this together, and for your time. So thank you.